addicts, homeless have been lured into working in the fields and then end up in a situation where they're forced to work in enslaved conditions, in slavery-like conditions.
Wow. Wow.
Here's a vulnerability that perhaps you wouldn't anticipate, and it's the scariest because, you know, it ties into your previous question where you asked, where is this? Why don't we recognize it? Is it really all around us? And it comes in the context of some of the websites that lure college students into relationships. You know, for example, a younger woman with a younger man, you know, in exchange for some financial benefit. How does that tie into human trafficking? Well, when you really explore the issue and you listen to the experts, they'll tell you that it's a continuum, that things like pornography, prostitution, human trafficking, at least when it comes to sexual human trafficking, you know, it's a continuum. One leads to another. So anything that traditionally lures you into one exposes you to being lured ultimately into the traffic situation.
Oh my God, and that's the scariest part because technology is, you know, it's being accused of being one of the main methods that these traffickers use, you know. But is technology really, is it helping or hindering in terms of getting to these you know, stopping the trafficking? Is it really the problem? What do you guys think?
I mean, I think
the problem is that, oh, go ahead, Rocio.
No. I mean, I think that technology can be used for good and for bad, right? That we have certainly seen cases of individuals that meet their traffickers on Facebook, on you know, on dating websites and things of that nature. But I think you know, the other side of the coin is that technology also spreads the word about this crime, and so I think it's not necessarily technology that's causing the problem to exploit. It's just people that are, you know, this is a crime that all of a sudden people are realizing is happening and people are paying attention to it.
Yeah, but it also kind of facilitates it, no?
I don't think technology alone. I think, again, we're talking about vulnerability. Mm-hmm. and you have many people in third world countries that are being recruited and forced to work in other industries where technology was not used as a means to recruit and lure people into trafficking. When we're talking about 27 million slaves, again, and we want to maybe focus on prostitution or the sex industry, it's again not the only. We don't have 20 million slaves that are being enslaved in the sex industry alone. What we have is that perhaps 20% of those slaves are forced to work in the sex industry. Well, where's the other 80%? And when we're talking about the other 80%, we're talking about the products that we eat, the products that we wear, the products that we drive. And so in that sense, we also have to be very aware of what is our complicity as consumers and as individuals in wanting to purchase cheap goods that in turn lead to the need for large amounts of cheap labor, and then this type of situation occurring elsewhere, and not necessarily just in the United States, although it happens here.
Good for thought, certainly. You know, I think this is such a like, you know, I think Teresita mentioned before how complex this issue is there's so many layers to it that are not readily apparent, but I want to talk about one of those layers, and one of those layers, obviously, this is a show that has a focus on Latino issues, and one of the ways, you know, one of the demographics that is the most affected is Latinos within the United States. Obviously, we're talking about you know, the United States and Latin America. So I want to ask specifically to Rocio, because I know that you've been working with the National Immigrant Justice Center. What is the impact of human trafficking in the Latino community? Then talk to me about, you know, your experience in all these years that you've been working on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to probably the work that Ana and her organization do, we serve immigrant survivors of human trafficking, and I think going to something that Anna also mentioned, the vulnerability. Immigrants in general are very vulnerable because they are seeking to come to this country to work and better their lives for themselves and their family, and sometimes at the cost of doing whatever needs to get done in order to have that paycheck, without realizing that sometimes that is going to be used, and employers are going to use that against them and exploit them and not pay them, and other issues that come with that. So I think, in my experience, human trafficking is related to the Latino community is the fact that a lot of Latinos are immigrants to this country, either recent arrivals or kind of newer immigrants that are still, low income and in those vulnerability groups. I also I work at the National Immigrant Justice Center, specifically with the Immigrant Children's Protection Project, and so we see a handful of kids that are coming from Central America and Mexico and other countries that are facing human trafficking on their journey north. And again, sometimes on their journey they're meeting traffickers, or sometimes from their home countries they're encountering someone that promises them the world when they get to the United States, and then they end up here in the United States, and they're either forced into a commercial sex industry or forced into a labor situation, or they feel like now they're indebted to this person who paid for their smuggling fees, but it means that they're going to have to work in a restaurant for the next 20, 30 years without getting any wages, which is a serious problem.
Wow, and especially now we it kind of was brought to light in terms of the situation that is going on at the border with the influx of children, unaccompanied minors into the country. So why do you think that these children and Latino immigrants in general, why do you think they're so vulnerable to this? Is it the laws, the regulations, the enforcement policies of the United States that facilitate this kind of traffic, or what is it?
I mean, I think in part immigrants are very afraid to come forward and report injustices. They're afraid to report crimes to the police, to law enforcement, because particularly if they're in this country as an undocumented individual, or if they cross the country without lawful status, they're afraid that the moment that they speak out, instead of being helped, or instead of the trafficker being accused, that they would be the ones accused and deported. And so, those are the conversations that we often have with the clients, trying to reassure them that if they do come forward and report the crime, that there is relief available for them, and that relief can lead to a permanent status here in the United States. And the importance of reemphasizing to them that this is a crime regardless of what immigration status you have. Someone cannot force you into something that you don't agree to, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, to add a little bit to that, we have to remember that Latino immigrants that are coming into the United States are usually fleeing either really bad criminal conditions in their home countries or in their home cities. They're also fleeing extreme poverty, and those are already situations that make them vulnerable. They're also coming from places where the government is very corrupt, and so accessing the authorities here is going to be a little bit harder for them, because there is such a huge mistrust of the authorities in their home countries already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Teresita, you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to elaborate on something Rocio said. So the government, especially the federal government, to a lesser extent, at least in Florida, the state government, realized that the problem isn't so much, well, I mean, it's not the people, but it's the heads of these organizations. So they put laws in place where who they're really trying to get to are the people that run these organizations, and that's where the benefits, immigration and otherwise, to the victims are available if the victims come forward. Another thing that I learned about a year or so ago is some of the consulates of these countries, for example, the Mexican consulate here in Miami, would help their nationals. If the national somehow could get to the consulate, they don't necessarily want to go straight to the American authorities. The organization here will help, even in some cases, to cover the legal expenses of the national that is in trouble and needs the help.
That's awesome to know. That's a great, and if you have any more information on that, Teresita, I can put it on my website as a resource for people who are going to be watching this afterwards. Let's talk about a little bit about the legislation aspect of it. Are there any protections for these victims? Is there anything being done in terms of legislation to protect and to also to crack down on the perpetrators of this crime? Do you know?
Well, as Rocio mentioned before, the Victims of Trafficking Protection Act enhanced penalties, and that act has been reauthorized in 2003, 2005, 2008, 2011. And each year, what we see is that the government facilitates the process of the main goals of the Victims of Trafficking Protection Act, which is one, to enhance penalties, to create a new crime, enhance penalties against traffickers, ensure that there are more prosecutions and investigations are easier particularly for immigrant victims. There have been creation of immigration benefits and mechanisms to provide for protection from deportation and to provide quick access to a work permit and a parole, or what they call continued presence, so that the victim may remain in the United States while there is an investigation pending, in addition to the creation of several visas that address immigration benefits for victims of violent crimes, including a T visa, which is particular for victims of trafficking, and a U visa, which is particular for victims of a much broader category of violent crimes. In addition, the government has also passed some other mechanisms in which family members who are being threatened in the home country can come into the United States prior to the creation of a visa under an advanced parole mechanism, so that they can also be protected here in the United States.
Wow, and this is information that nobody knows about. So, what kind of where can people go to find out about this? What are the resources out there? And feel free to talk about the work that your own organizations are doing, because I know you're doing a lot of things to help these victims.
Let me chime in here to say two things, too. Can you hear me?
Yeah.